I'd like to point out that this will be a general read. We're looking at the general influence of the stars upon our life. If you would like to know something more specific about your life and how the stars are specifically interacting with you, I would suggest getting a reading with a professional astrologer. You can do so with me through the link in the description below if you would like. I'd like to give a special welcome to anyone who is new to astrology. You're so welcome here at this channel. If you would like to learn to read your own astrology chart, I offer a short course. It's very cheap and it's lots of fun. The link is in the description below. To all of my friends who join me here each week, who like and share my videos and subscribe to my channel, I do love you. To my gold and silver and bronze star family members, I do pray for you every day. I thank the universe for your presence in my life. If anyone would like to join the Guiding Star family, the link is also in the description below. Hello, I'm Kesenya, and welcome to this series that I've been preparing for you all about Neptune and Neptune's transits through every house in the horoscope and how it will affect your life. Now, I've been wanting to do this series for quite some time now. However, I decided I'd wait until Neptune had crossed my ascendant and my first house lord. In doing so, there's a strategy behind this. I wanted to see how Neptune would play out in my life on those very significant and key points in my chart. Astrology is 50% reading books and doing courses and getting mentors and teachers, and the other 50% is observation and experience of the planets in your life. So the older you get, the more wisdom, the more knowledge that you will have about how planets impact us. So now that I've gone through those particular transits of Neptune in my first house, I feel that I'm ready to talk more in depth about this very watery planet. So let's start by having a look at what Neptune is all about astronomically. So Neptune comes after Uranus in the order of the planets. We have Mercury, Venus, the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, boom, Neptune. Second to last of the key players in astrology. Pluto is still considered to be a planet of influence in astrological circles, and therefore Neptune is the second last. Now, when Neptune was discovered, it wasn't through observation. They didn't sort of spot Neptune in the sky and go, aha, there it is, because you actually need a telescope to see Neptune. It's not something you can observe with the naked eye. And so Neptune was discovered through mathematics. Basically, the astrologers of the time when Neptune was discovered, and we're going to talk about that when Neptune was discovered in just a minute, but the astrologers of the time were observing Uranus, and they had mathematically predicted where Uranus was going to go according to all their observations, and then Uranus did his usual quirky thing and did not follow the predicted orbit. And so from that, they were able to calculate that there must be a planet further out that's pulling on Neptune, and its gravitational force has caused it to move in a different way than we expected or anticipated. And so because of their mathematical calculations, they began to look for another planet beyond Uranus. And voila, we have Neptune. Now, what is very interesting, and this is quite telling about the character of Neptune actually as well, what is very interesting is that Galileo had observed Neptune back in 1612. He didn't realize that Neptune was a planet. I don't know what he thought it was, but he didn't sort of put two and two together and think, there's another planet out there. So Galileo had observed Neptune, and this was a whole 234 years before the discovery of Neptune. Now, why I say this correlates to sort of the ambiguous nature of Neptune is that he's a bit slippery as a planet. It's hard to sort of pin down. So here was Galileo observing Neptune, not realizing what he was, not sort of seeing it for what it was, basically sort of under an illusion that Neptune was something else. That is a very Neptunian quality, which we'll talk about very soon. But 234 years later, we had the discovery of Neptune in the real through that mathematical observation that I was talking about. This was in 1846. Now, most people know that when we discover new planets, there is often a rise in consciousness or an increase in conscious awareness in humanity on the Earth at the time of the discovery of a new planet. For example, when Uranus was discovered, we had a number of revolutions occurring around the world. What does Uranus correlate to? It correlates to freedom, liberation, equality, and equal distribution of resources. And what were these revolutions about all around the world? Well, namely, the French Revolution was occurring when Uranus was discovered. And that was about no more let them eat cake kind of stuff. No more of the aristocracy living in opulent luxury beyond compare, while the poor people of the land went hungry and could barely clothe and feed themselves. And of course, Uranus, sorry to diverge off Neptune, but Uranus is all about those things, equality. And so the conscious awareness of the planet had reached a point where it was like, no, now hang on, we're not going to take this inequality anymore. We want things to be fairer. We want things to be more even. And lo and behold, at the discovery of Uranus, which rules those things, the consciousness was ripe and ready to embrace that as part of its awareness. Now, the same occurs with Neptune, who was discovered a little while after, as I said, in 1846. So what was the expansion of consciousness that occurred at the time Neptune was discovered? Well, we had an invention of photography that had occurred sort of 20 years before. Now, when we're talking about these big planetary discoveries, this is no mediocre discovery. This is really kick-ass stuff. And so we look at the surrounding sort of, 20, 30 years as an era of the discovery of Neptune. Keep in mind, when I'm talking about this, that up until the discovery of Uranus in the late 1700s, there had the existence of planets beyond what you could see with the naked eye was not known, was not proven. And so for thousands of years, the consciousness of humanity had been in a state where it was only aware of what it could see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. In the real, in the earthly dimension. If you couldn't see beyond Saturn, then there were no planets beyond Saturn. And then all of a sudden, at the discovery of Uranus, boom, we have an awareness of more. And so Uranus was discovered, and then Neptune was discovered. And so the surrounding sort of 30 odd years in the vicinity of 1846 when Neptune was discovered are Neptunian times. And so we look at what was unfolding in consciousness then. And as I've just said a moment ago, photography. Photography was discovered. Neptune rules photography. Motion pictures were discovered 30 years or so after the discovery of Neptune. And Neptune rules motion pictures. The spiritualist movements were unfolding around the world. We started to find people who were interested in sort of hypnosis and mesmerism, people who would be, looking at channeling, people who wanted to conduct seances. These sorts of things started to come into vogue as parlor games, as did the tarot card readings and even astrological readings as sort of, like I said, parlor games, entertainment at fancy people's dinner parties and so on. That was the very glamorous side of Neptunian times, using those spiritualist things as entertainments for glamorous people. Plastics were discovered around this time. Braille for the blind, writing for the blind. Antiseptics. Pasteurization was discovered and started to be used. And these are just a few of the advancements that occurred in society around the time that Neptune was discovered. We also had cultural movements like Romanticism, the poets, Byron and Shelley around this time as well. We had, alongside Byron and Shelley, we had things like the Frankenstein novel or the Dracula novel, which is a very interesting thing. Impressionism was also the painting style en vogue around this era of history. And we also had the Communist Manifesto that was written. Now, some people, if you're not familiar with politics, the name communism can conjure up all sorts of negative imagery in your head. But the idea behind communism was a bit like Uranus in that it was about equality and compassion to everybody. So these are combinations of both Uranian themes, which is equality, and sort of an even playing field for everybody, And also Neptune, which is highly compassionate, wanting everybody to get an opportunity. And of course, Neptune, for those who we haven't got to this point yet, but Neptune rules idealism as well. So the ideal of the Communist Manifesto was present in these Neptunian times as well. Whether it actually functioned and worked was another matter, but the ideal was there. A utopian vision for society is what Neptune is all about, and so there's no surprise that we had movements in that direction towards that ideal at this time. Back to the astronomy, Neptune is a planet that's made up of liquid and ice. And it's also full of different gases as well. So it's quite a combination, Neptune, of many things. But it's very similar in its size and its structure to its nearest planet, which is Uranus. They're almost twin-like in many senses, even though they function very differently astrologically. Like Uranus, Neptune is actually circled by some very faint rings of dust. Uranus's rings are more visible, but Neptune does have rings as well, very light, very faint rings around Neptune. If you've seen images of Neptune that were taken, I think it was by the Voyager space probe, I may be wrong there, but if memory serves me, I think it was Voyager that took images of Neptune, you'll know that it's this beautiful, serene, blue-looking planet that has some wafting sort of white, they look like clouds, around it occasionally. And despite its very serene-looking surface, it is quite a wild planet underneath. So again, that illusionary factor there. On the surface, it looks like it's cool, calm, collected, and underneath, it's not what it seems. On Neptune, winds whip around the planet at, I have to read this, 2,100 kilometers an hour, and they're furious winds. Not only that, Neptune takes only 16 hours to do a rotation. It's heaps bigger than Earth, Neptune, lots bigger than Earth. And we take 24 hours as an Earth to rotate. But if you're a monstrous sized planet and you're spinning, doing a circuit of 16 hours, then the gravitational pull of Neptune becomes pretty phenomenal, despite the fact that you're mostly made up of gas. So this momentum of the gravitational force from the spin and the winds that whip around Neptune sort of whips up all the ice, methane, hydrogen, helium, and ammonia. Had to read that list to make sure I got the chemicals right. Whips it all up into a big slushy mess. So it's not this pure ethereal kind of atmosphere or body of Neptune. It's actually a bit of a slushy, wild mess when you get down to it. Now, some scientists, and this is very interesting, some scientists have hypothesized, just through their calculations and observations, that the core of Neptune, which is burning iron, very fiery, very hot core, they have hypothesized that there is a layer of diamond, liquid diamond, that encircles the core of Neptune. Now, just how they've reached that conclusion, don't ask me, but it is there in scientific journals that this is a hypothesis that could prove true and correct. Now, this iron core that's burning hot, white hot iron core, is actually bigger than the Earth. So the core, the solid mass, if you like, of Neptune is larger than the Earth, and it burns at about, or its temperature is about 5,000 degrees Celsius. So it's incredibly hot, even though it's so far from the sun and distant from the sun's rays, which is usually where heat comes from in the solar system. This Neptune has its own heat source through this burning iron core. So you're getting the picture? We have this impression of Neptune, of serenity on the outside astronomically, but not quite what it seems deep down. And again, we'll see that represented when we start talking about the astrology of Neptune and how it impacts us, and therefore how it's going to impact us when it travels through each house. We also can see that it is a very fluid type planet. It's, slushy, slippery, and of course Neptune rules the watery depths of the ocean, if you're familiar with mythology and the title of Neptune. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. I love the analogy that we're seeing here of this watery fluid planet, but it has a solidness at the core and a preciousness, the liquid diamond. There's something precious at the core of Neptune. Now, Neptune, as we've already stated, is invisible. You cannot see Neptune out on a fine stargazing night. You will always need a telescope to see Neptune. And as the old Hermetic principle goes, as above, so below, the way things appear in the sky from our vantage point on Earth is exactly how they will play out and be represented and reflected in our lives on the planet. What does that mean? Well, it means that the planets we can see with the naked eye, the visible planets, in astrology, they correlate and connect to what we experience visibly, tangibly, experientially on the Earth. Our touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. You know, the physical things of the experience of being a body incarnate on the Earth connect to visible planets and what they rule. When you get to Neptune, actually when you get to Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, they're all invisible without a telescope, and therefore they connect to the inner realm of the psyche, what motivates us unconsciously, you know, our behavioral patterns, our things we can't help about ourselves, you know, our deep psychological wounds and our karmas that we carry with us at the core of our self, at our soul level. They correspond to these invisible planets because as above, so below. We can't see them, therefore it's like the part of the iceberg that sits underneath the water. You can't see it, but it's still there packing a whopping punch, especially if you happen to be on the Titanic. So Neptune has at least 14 moons that circle it. It has a greater and denser gravity than the Earth. So if you're standing on Neptune, you will weigh a lot more than you do on the Earth. And it takes longer than one lifetime for Neptune to circle the sun. It takes 165 years. So in your lifetime, you will never see Neptune return to its natal place in your astrological chart. You just won't live that long, at least not in this day and age as I'm recording this video. Who knows what science might do in the future, but right now you won't live to be 165 and see Neptune come back to its natal position. Let's explore Neptune mythologically now. Well, Neptune is the name of the Roman god of the sea. Not only the sea though, in the oceans, but also of fresh water. Neptune was the Roman god of fresh water as well. And we often see Neptune in mythological pictorial representation with his trident. And of course, what is the symbol of Neptune astrologically? It's a trident. So there we go. There's so much correlation between the mythologies and what plays out in the skies again here. So again, there's no coincidences that when the astronomers discovered Neptune, they didn't know that it was made mostly of liquid and gas. They didn't know it was mostly a fluid planet. But lo and behold, here we are. They gave it the name Neptune, king of the oceans, and Neptune is quite an oceanic planet with its liquid mass. Once again, this is showing us how the conscious awareness works, even in unconscious ways. Now, a little bit more about Neptune mythologically was that he was the son of the Titan god Saturn. Now, along with Neptune, there was Jupiter and there was Pluto that were the sons of Saturn. And Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto didn't really get along with Saturn very well. If you're familiar with the mythology of Saturn and Jupiter, you'll know that the mother of Jupiter hid him away because Saturn had a habit of eating his children lest they rise up against him and take over. So theoretically, in the mythology, Neptune and Pluto were gobbled up by their father Saturn. But then along came Jupiter when he was all grown up to the rescue, and Saturn regurgitated his offspring, Neptune and Pluto. There were others as well, but the main ones were Neptune and Pluto, the brothers of Jupiter. And together, Jupiter, Neptune and Pluto overthrew their father Saturn, and Jupiter became king of the gods. And we had the reign of the Olympian gods from that point on, which include Neptune and Pluto. So Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto are the Olympian gods. Saturn was the Titan god. And Uranus, who was the father of Saturn, just to confuse matters even further, was not a Titan and not an Olympian. He was sort of one of the forefathers of them all. In ancient Greece and Rome, they celebrated the role of water in their lives, and they had a festival to celebrate this, and it was known as Neptunalia. There was also another festival that occurred at the similar time called Furinalia. I won't go into the mythology of that name, but they were both celebrated around the same time. So July 23rd and July 25th, the role of water and the preciousness of water in life was celebrated with these festivals. So Neptunalia, it was a time of honoring the god Neptune and its watery association. So let's take a peek at the astrology of Neptune. I'm going to tell you all about Neptune astrologically. What is Neptune about? Well, as we've already come across, Neptune is about illusion, seeing something and actually realizing it's something else. It's not what it seems. So that can be a number of things can be displayed that way. Glamour is ruled by Neptune, because if you're glamorous, you've got amazing makeup and hair and beautiful, shimmering, gorgeous clothes and stuff. You look very glamorous, but is that who you really are? When you wake up in bed in the morning, and your hair's a tousled mess and you haven't got makeup on and you're wearing your baggy old t-shirt, you might not look glamorous. So glamour is ruled by Neptune because it's part of that deception, if you like, but not a bad deception. It's just a deception. It's not what it seems. Neptune, in that sense, rules glamour. Neptune, as we've already discussed, rules a desire to return to utopia, to achieve utopia, to create heaven on earth, so to speak. So that can be a very positive thing if we're wanting to make the world a better place. And Neptune is also quite a compassionate planet. There is a lot of unconditional love that goes along with Neptune, brotherly love, the idea of anyone can be saved from their horrible life or, their difficulties or their own ill choices in life. Neptune has this sort of unconditional love. Some might refer to that as this redeemer quality about it. And Neptune can be connected to miracles as well, because if somebody is raised up from the muck and mire into a wonderful life, well, that is often seen as a miracle. And that transformation that occurs is a very Neptunian associated thing in astrology. Part of this desire for utopia can actually have connections to a longing to escape the horror and the harshness of earthly reality. And those of us who are very Neptunian, who have a strong Neptune in our chart, or even a strong 12th house or a strong Pisces, will know what this is all about. The wanting to escape from earth and earth realities because they're too hard to bear. They're fearful. Earth is a fearful place for these highly sensitive Neptunian, Piscean, 12th house souls, and it's almost too hard. So Neptune is also associated with tremendous longing to tap out, to escape, a longing to go to heaven. Now you'll see a lot of religious groups, fanatical religious groups going down this road where it doesn't matter what I endure in this lifetime, I will be rewarded when I go to heaven. And that's all they're living for. They don't even engage in earthly reality and earthly life because it's only about heaven and getting to heaven after this horrible life is over. That's a Neptunian thing. Also, Neptune has this idea about it of wanting to return to the watery depths, i.e. the womb, being in the embryonic fluid, being safe and secure, not having to sort of struggle and make it on our own because, hey, we've got everything we need. We're warm, we're safe, we're fed, we're in the womb. And Neptune has this desire for that too. So it's a dual desire for paradise, heaven, but also at the same time a desire to, return to the safety and security of home, so to speak. Neptune can also give a longing to be saved. You want your hero to come along and rescue you from this, terrible existence. That's a Neptunian longing. But also, if we find that we desire to be the rescuer, we want to be somebody's hero, that's a Neptunian thing as well. So there's often a spiritual connection with Neptune, and I'm sure from what I've just described, you can see connections in religious circles to savior mentality, redeemer qualities, longing for paradise. You can see where Neptune's getting its sort of shadow side of spirituality popping up there in religious, ideology. But Neptune is also in the positive side, which I love to talk about more, is the beautiful connection to angelic realms, to the divine. So if we channel higher wisdom, higher knowledge, that's a Neptune thing. If we're channeling creativity, beauty, art, if we're channeling unconditional love. And now I'm talking about channeling here, not in the sort of, some entities speaking through me, although that is a Neptunian thing. I'm talking about simply expressing things that come from beyond us. Beautiful things, gracious things, ethereal things, things that come from beyond the earthly plane. That spiritual side of Neptune is so beautiful. So Neptune is the manifestation of divine love, divine grace, and divine creativity, divine creative ideals. He is connected to visualization, imagination, and even healing through visualization and imagination. The idea that through your thought processes and lifting them to a higher plane, dreaming and aspiring of what it could be, that you can heal yourself. And again, we come back to the miraculous component here, where people are miraculously healed. Neptune has connections to hypnosis as well, and mesmerism. In fact, Mesmer was the man who developed the idea of being hypnotized as a form of healing. So the two are very similar. And so Neptune has connections with this as well. It's all very interesting, but Neptune is actually a planet that it's hard to define him, and I use the word him loosely, as a masculine planet. Now, Neptune as a god was a masculine god, but the expression of Neptune is actually very feminine. It errs on the feminine side. So it would be very interesting to understand exactly how they reached the concept in ancient mythology that Neptune, the god of the oceans, was actually a man. I feel maybe that came about at the time of the ancient Greeks and Romans, when the patriarchy was establishing itself, because really the expression of Neptune is this compassionate, unconditionally loving, highly creative energy, which connects more to the water signs and the watery energy, which is feminine in astrology. So very interesting there. Neptune is a more feminine energy expression. Neptune rules the sign of Pisces in modern astrology, and of course that is a water sign as well. Neptune is also in astrology neither benefic nor malefic. So that means, we don't put a label of good or bad on him. But really with Neptune, it depends what aspects you have to your placement of Neptune in the chart, whether he will manifest his shadow side or whether he will manifest his light side in your life. And we've kind of talked a little bit about both here now. I will talk further about the shadow side in just a second. But if you have mostly good aspects, like a conjunction, we can classify that as a good aspect, or perhaps a trine or a sextile to Neptune from other planets, then it's looking good for you. Neptune will tend to express in its more angelic form. It's more miraculous, blessed form. But if you have quite a mixed bag, maybe you've got some squares to your Neptune, maybe you've got some oppositions to your Neptune. If that's what it's looking like, then you may end up with a bit more of the shadow side exhibiting in your personality or what you attract in your life. Let's explore what that is all about. Well, some of the shadow side of Neptune is in the desire for utopia. We want to see evil people punished. And you'll see this a lot expressing in religions, where we just want everyone who's bad to go to hell. And that's actually a shadow Neptunian energy, because we want to preserve utopia for the pure, and everyone else can suffer, So that's a shadow side expression of Neptune. Narcissism can be connected with Neptune's shadow side as well. And so can masochism, actually. If we think about this desire to be seen as holy and pure, often that connects to making ourselves falsely humble and lower than another person. And that can incite in another person distaste, and disgust for another person who is falsely humble. And of course, if you're familiar with the idea of masochism, then you know that it's about debasing yourself in order that you might feel more worthy or more holy because you've made yourself lowly. It's a very slippery, shall we say, concept. And again, not everything is as it seems. It might seem with someone who is in a masochist state that they don't care about themselves, that they don't love themselves, that they're being cruel to themselves. But very often under the surface is this energy of wanting, the best way I can describe it, to be pure through making yourself lowly, like the flagellants did in ancient medieval times through whipping themselves. Oh, they're so pure and holy because they're whipping themselves for Christ. You know, it's that kind of idea. Odd one, but not everything is as it seems with Neptune and Neptune's shadow side. Projection is something that is actually a Neptunian behavioral quality coming from this psychological depth. If we have separation anxiety, that's a shadow side of Neptune. Of course it is, because we are longing to return to the womb. And when we're separate from that safe space, separation anxiety. So if you're looking at those psychological issues in a chart and, assessing that, look at Neptune and what Neptune's doing in the chart. Shadow side of Neptune can be idealization, where we don't see a person clearly for who they are, but we put them on a pedestal. So celebrity culture would be one expression of that. Anyone we put on a pedestal and hold up there, and we create an illusion around that person. It's not the truth. It's not real. It's not what is really going on at the core of a person to have them up on a pedestal and think that, oh my God, they're so perfect. That's idealization, and that's Neptune shadow side, as is hysteria, as is addiction. Addiction's another expression here. And why? Because addiction is escapism. If we're addicted to drugs, usually with Neptune involved, it's because we want to get away from the harshness of reality. If we're addicted to alcohol, again, it's an escape mechanism and it's an escape valve, but not a healthy one, because reality is too harsh and we just long to get out of here. Obviously, deception is a shadow side of Neptune, because if you're creating an illusion, while there can be sort of times when that's good, as in the case of glamour and that's fun and what have you, sometimes when we are creating an illusion, we're deceiving others. We're pulling the wool over their eyes. We're not being our true self, and that is a shadow Neptune expression. Sacrifice, I would say, is a shadow Neptunian expression. Again, it comes in close context with this false humility kind of behavior. If we feel that we have to sacrifice ourselves for another person, then we're kind of making ourselves to be better than the other person. I'll go in, I'll sacrifice myself, and then that person will be saved. And there's a false humility about it, a deceptive humility that goes along with that. And of course, oftentimes when people have strong Neptune representations in the chart, they lose themselves, they martyr themselves for the sake of another. Does that benefit their life? No, usually. But it might make them feel spiritually greater, or that they have been a noble person. Again, we've got this sacrifice energy that's a bit not what it seems, and this is also the shadow side of Neptune. Victimization. Victimization is another Neptunian energy where, poor me, I am suffering because life has been unkind, and therefore I am longing to get away from life, and return to the womb or go to paradise because I have been victimized. Instead of being our own savior, instead of making the best of things and doing what we can to transform our karma, no, we're a victim and we just want to escape. That's so Neptunian shadow side. Especially, you could call it suffering that's seen as purity. So these are some of the Neptunian shadow energies. I don't want to leave it on that though. There are good things, obviously, that Neptune correlates to. We've talked about some of these, but, others might be the belief that there is enough for everybody, and that the universe can be kind and the universe has our back. In fact, transcendence of matter is a very big Neptunian theme. The belief that eventually good will win over evil. That's Neptunian as well. Jesus' teachings. Jesus' teachings were very Neptunian. He was, after all, the avatar for the age of Pisces, which was ruled by Neptune. So compassion, unconditional love, we've talked about that. Forgiveness, healing, all these things, divine healing, miraculous healing. These are Neptunian ruled things. So Jesus was a big representation of Neptune energy in the positive. The most creative and artistic planet, we've already talked about that. And it's actually at its strongest capacity in water signs. So Neptune does very well in Pisces, Cancer, or Scorpio. She will tend to give the best results if that's where he is in your natal chart, but also if that's where he's transiting at any given time, he's going to give the better side of himself to you. Neptune rules the color light blue. Hence, I have my blue blouse on here today for this video, but I've also worn my very well, you might not be able to see it because the color in this camera doesn't actually come up that good. I need to get a new camera, but it's actually a very beautiful velvet jacket that's ocean color, like the kind of tranquil turquoise that we see up on the beaches of Queensland or some beautiful tropical beaches. And I thought, seeing as Neptune rules these gorgeous oceans, I would wear my beautiful aqua turquoise color velvet jacket with my light blue Neptunian top. Neptune can also have connections to lavender, purpley colors also. Hence, we see often people who work in spiritual, sort of new agey fields have a lot of purple going on, because often they might not be aware of this even, but they're probably highly Neptunian people. They have a strong Neptune in their chart, and so the purple element tends to come through quite a lot, and you'll see a lot of, websites and stuff with purple this and lavender that on many spiritual sites. Neptune rules the gemstone amethyst as well, and so amethyst has a lot of qualities to it that correlate very strongly to Neptune. Some tangible things, and I did say in the beginning Neptune's more psychological. Yep, that's true, very true, but Neptune does have some governance of certain items on the planet, namely because of what was happening at the time Neptune was discovered, what things were starting to be used and utilized when Neptune was discovered, and therefore Neptune gets the rulership of those things. So the ocean, obviously, but oils, plastics, impressionism, film, photography, advertising, poisons, escapism, that's not actually a tangible thing, but that's obviously something Neptune rules, drugs. As I've already illustrated, a lot of these things were being discovered. Film, photography, medications, the shipping industry, steam-powered ships were really starting to get a Guernsey around the time that Neptune came along. So shipping and the oceans, all of these things, highly Neptunian. Now, in my level 1 astrology course that is coming out, you can learn more about Neptune and the things Neptune rules, and we go into greater depth with Neptune there and its rulerships. So if you're interested in knowing more, check out that course. But what does Neptune want? It wants unwavering trust, unwavering love, and unwavering belief that the divine will come through for you. Even in the face of no evidence at all, Neptune wants us to believe. If you are 40 odd years old and you've never had a boyfriend, Neptune is saying, keep believing and the miracle can happen. And I would encourage you, if that's the case, well, wait till you're 42. Who knows? Neptune, when it reaches its maturation at 42, may just bring you what you've been waiting for. So that's a short look at the beautiful and quite intriguing and unusual planet of Neptune. Now let's have a look at what Neptune is all about when he travels through a house in the horoscope and what he's going to do for you while he's there. So how do we find out what house Neptune is transiting through at any given time? Well, I would suggest going to an app or a website. I use, just to quickly find out what is going on in the skies, I use planetwatcher.com. Sometimes I use Solarfire as well, but that's a program that requires a cost involved. So if you want a free one, Planet Watcher's the one. Go there and find out what sign Neptune is currently transiting through. Now, Neptune is the glyph that looks like a trident, belonging to the god Neptune, of course. And all you need to do, you need to know your glyphs, and you need to know the sign glyphs as well. or the sign symbols as well. Go to wherever Neptune sits, see what sign it's in, and then we need to figure out where does that fall in your chart. And how we figure that out is we find out what sign is rising on the horizon in your chart. That is your first house in whole sign astrology. So you're going to need to know that as well. Let's say, for example, your first house happens to be Sagittarius. When we know our rising sign and we know where Neptune currently is, let's use the example here of Neptune in Pisces, then all we've got to do is count from our rising sign to Neptune to figure out what house Neptune is currently transiting for us. For this example, Sagittarius is the first house, Capricorn second, 2, 3, and 4. Pisces is the fourth house from Sagittarius, and so therefore if you were a Sagittarius and Neptune was transiting through Pisces, you would want to look at your Neptune through the fourth house video, which is this one, lo and behold. So we're going to be exploring in this video, as we've said, Neptune in the fourth house, and this is a very important transit because this is an angular house. The angular houses, for people who are new to astrology, are the first house, fourth house, seventh house, and 10th house, and they are particularly influential, and that makes this transit a very important one. So this transit brings us 14 years of looking deep within, of going introspective, of getting down to what's at our core. Quite literally, we have the fourth house at the lowest point in the chart. It's down the bottom, almost off my screen there. It's down the bottom, and it represents the deep inner depths of us. Who are we at our deep core, feelings and emotions and structure of our inner self? And so of course Neptune moving through here gives us the old adage of how to know thyself. Now this is an adage that is written on the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, and it's also attributed to Plato as well. So knowing thyself, the most important thing a person can do in their lives, and this transit for 14 years of Neptune through the fourth house is really all about that purpose. Neptune in some schools of astrology is actually exalted in the sign of Cancer, and of course the fourth house has strong connotations and connections with the sign of Cancer, so we get the same vibe out of this. We become very feeling aware now. Neptune does not expand whatever it touches, but it does push out the boundaries. Neptune is to have no boundaries, no blocks, no hindrances, no parameters. And in the house of feelings, we let go of what is safe and comfortable for us to experience in order that we might understand our depths now. So this is a house of feelings. We have sort of no limits on our feelings, and we want to sort of, this is a house of safety and comfort as well. We kind of let go of that too. They're all tied in together so that we can know ourselves more. Now, for some people, this might look like living in a foreign culture. Neptune rules faraway places, and this is the house of where we live. And this is going to really, of course, if you move to a foreign culture, you're going to let go of what is safe and comfortable and known. That's a fourth house thing as well. You expand those boundaries in order to come to terms with, okay, who am I? If I shed my culture, if I shed my home, if I shed my family, if I dissolve that away as my identity and I go to a foreign culture where I'm not known, where I'm a foreigner, who do I become? Who am I really with all the periphery? So that's one example of how Neptune doesn't dissolve our identity, but he pushes the boundaries of our self out so that we can know ourselves more. I hope that makes sense, but that's probably the best illustration I can give of how Neptune operates in that way. So your home and domestic life can really change with this transit. Obviously, I've just given you an illustration, but you don't have to go overseas for that to occur. Your home life can just change, and suddenly your home life is a bit more sensitized, or you're more emotional in your home space, or connected to how you feel about where you live. Certainly the changes that occur are not going to be like Uranian changes that sort of come in out of the blue like a lightning bolt, and suddenly, oh, you're shocked into a big change in your home. Or all of a sudden one day you decide, I'm sick of this furniture, and you put it out on the street for rubbish collection and you go buy a whole lot of new furniture. You know, it's not sudden changes in your domestic and home life like that. It's more infiltrating, slowly, piece by piece, bit by bit, because that's how Neptune operates. It creeps in like a fog. So where you start at the beginning of this 14-year transit, you might, let's use an illustration. You might start out with a home that's completely mid-century modern, and you've got all the Ames chairs in the world and funky 60s art on the walls, and you know, you're really going down that mid-century modern look. And then piece by piece over the 14-year period, Neptune changes your home domestic environment, and by the end of the 14 years you look at your home and it's full of vintage pieces from the 1920s, and suddenly everything's very art deco, and the mid-century stuff's gone in place of, you know, sort of that I don't know, 1920s sort of Egyptian look that can be very popular. You know, and so you let go of these things, but it happens in a manner that's more infiltrating. Now, I've talked about the physicality of your home space, but the same can apply with how you are living your life in your home, how you're experiencing life in your domestic environment with your family, with your close connections, or the tribe of people who are intimate to you. You might find that your intimate tribe of close-knit community changes completely during this transit, and the people who were your close, intimate, community, by the end of the 14 years, a completely different set of friends. Not friends, but we're talking about bonds, like deep bonds. Now, in ancient times, the fourth house was connected to the tribe, you know, our tribal community. And again, we can see that in this day and age, but our tribal community might take the form of, you know, our spiritual group that we hang with. You know, once a week we get together with these girlfriends who are into the mystical and the ethereal, like me, you know. And so at the beginning of this 14-year transit, you might be hanging with your tribe, and then by the end of the 14-year transit, your tribe is a completely different set of people. That's another sort of illustration of that infiltrating change that can come to the fourth house. Now, while we're talking about domestic environment, let's step back from the tribe for just a second. If you keep an eye on your house, quite literally, because Neptune transits to the fourth house have a reputation for bringing some upheavals, particularly when Neptune transits the IC, the manifestation point of the fourth house. Around that time, you really want to make sure that the gas is working properly, there are no leaks, that your water situation is fine, water supply and oil as well. Everything is hunky-dory, as we used to say when I was a kid. You want to make sure everything's okay with your house in those realms, because Neptune brings sudden unexpected leaks, or you find out about sort of a leak in the bathroom wall that's been infiltrating and going on for years, and you've got all this mold. So that's another thing to be very careful. Things that are unseen and hidden, that are damaging, going on, that you didn't realize, are very Neptunian, and it's happening in your home potentially when Neptune is transiting here. So get everything also, if you're buying a house during this 14-year period, get everything triple checked. You know, get the termite inspectors in, as long as they do a good job. They didn't do a good job on my house. I moved in and there were termites, even though I'd had the check done. So get things triple checked when you are buying a house during Neptune transit the fourth house period. Not only that, but if you're signing contracts for a real estate deal as well, get things triple checked, because you can miss the fine detail, you can miss the important points, and then end up with trouble on your hands. So make sure you do that during this transit. Have all the right insurances in place. Very, very important. Don't store valuables in your home during this 14-year period. Now, by that I mean you've got to have the stuff that you need to live in your home. But if you've got, say, gold or silver in a safe in your home, I highly recommend going and putting it in like a bank safe, or, you know, going to a gold depository place or whatever, and put your valuables somewhere that is not your home, because Neptune, the shadow side of Neptune, is to steal, or to have things stolen from you, or to lose things. So if you have significant valuables that you don't need for your everyday life, then put them somewhere off your property during this particular transit. There can also be, with a Neptune transit to the fourth house, termite issues. So I did mention that a moment ago, but foundational issues with your house as well. Get things double checked there. You know, you might notice that your floor starts to sag if you're on stumps over in one corner or something like that. And, you know, that sort of thing can happen. So, you know, forewarned, forearmed, as I always say. Now, back to sort of our tribe and our circle of intimates. There can be difficulties with our mother or with the family. And by difficulties, I mean they might start acting in a very Neptunian manner. This could be positive. They could start to host prayer meetings in their house or spiritual workshops. You know, they might start attending spiritual workshops or start hosting spiritual workshops or something like that. They could start doing a lot of cool Neptunian things, artist workshops, music rehearsals. You know, they might get involved in the local theatre productions or a filmmaking project. You know, you might start to notice that these people get more Neptunian in the positive sense, but could also get more Neptunian in the shadow sense as well. So they might start escaping reality or tapping out in, you know, maybe drugs or alcohol or, you know, taking big long vacations, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, just going to day spas or getting away from things, escaping. They might be behaving in any of those Neptunian ways that I just mentioned. Now, whenever Neptune is in the fourth house in the natal chart, it's considered to be a world changer placement, and that can lead us to change our life throughout the course of our life. Infiltratingly, we will change how we do family. You know, we'll break away from the generational influence and we'll start to turn things around and do things our own way, but it'll be done in a very infiltrating, sort of unobtrusive fashion throughout our lifetime. That's when Neptune's in the natal house. And the similar thing can happen when Neptune transits the fourth house in the transiting chart. We can find that we start to change our world with regard to tribe, family, you know, community that is close, and our home life. And we've kind of already touched on this as well. But Neptune in an angular house is to change our world in some significant way. So don't be surprised if by the end of this transit, your whole relationships with family, your whole domestic life, your living arrangements are completely changed for your own betterment and growth. This is a time when spiritual people go even deeper with their spirituality. That can sometimes be tough depending on the kind of community that you live in. Certainly where I am, it's tremendously conservative. So to go even more spiritual than what I currently am can face a lot of difficulties and ridicule, but you personally will enjoy that. You will, you know, being able to go deeper, being able to become more spiritually tuned in and aligned. It's going to be a beautiful experience for you personally, and hopefully you're in a community that can embrace that. Artistic people can get more creative as well. They're inspired, they produce more, they're more in alignment with their imagination now and tapping into their imaginative qualities. So lots of fun. Anything that is fourth house now increases as well, because remember, there are no boundaries. So our emotions are sensitized. It's not that we become moody, we're more receptive emotionally. We feel the feelings of other people. We become more empathic. You know, we're talking to a barista one morning and, you know, she's really down, and we kind of pick up on that energy and sort of feel her feelings empathically. You know, we are more sensitized now, not necessarily more moody. That can be the case for some during this 14-year transit, but those people at a sort of a higher vibrational level become more sensitized rather than tossed on the waves of their feelings, so to speak. We can also find that childhood issues can resurface now. You know, you think you've dealt with something, and another layer of that issue, that problem, that psychological upheaval comes up, and you've got to deal with it again. You've got to confront that old chestnut, you know, and so that can be difficulty, but not difficulty. That can be difficult. but it can help you to process something and shed another layer, So again, psychological work is very, very good during this transit. Read psychology books, do a psychology course, or a short course in temperament and personality to understand yourself more and go into the analysis of perhaps those childhood issues or hang-ups or problems, because it's a great time for doing that sort of work. Now, the fourth house traditionally in astrology is the house of the mother. There are some practitioners of astrology who I highly admire, Liz Green is one of them, who believe the fourth house is actually the house of the father. And the more I'm reading about this and looking into this, the more I'm actually in agreement. It does seem to match up, certainly for me, more with the life of my father. So I'll leave that one for you to explore personally. Fourth house, is it mother or is it father? But depending on where you sit with this, you might start to observe and perceive that your father or your mother might actually start becoming more Neptunian by being a bit more absent, being tapped out, not there the way they were. So, for example, they might move into an old age home, or they might go overseas and live overseas, far away from you. So suddenly something is lost with regard to the mother. I'm not saying they die. That's not what I'm saying at all with this transit. But there is that absenteeism that can happen with this transit as well. Now, it can also be emotional absenteeism. So, you kind of lose that emotional connection with a parent, perhaps not through anything intentional. Like I say, a parent might go live in another country, you don't see them as much, so your connections aren't as frequent, these kinds of things where the emotional presence is not what it once was. Now, obviously, if you are a parent and you have a child who is going through this transit, Neptune through the fourth house, you want to be very, very careful, because even if you are present in their life, they might perceive that mum just isn't there for me anymore, or dad just isn't engaged any longer. They're tuned out, they're tapped out, and I just don't feel a connection. So that can be very difficult for children. And so I just want to give you a heads up, if you are a parent of a child going through this transit, really make an effort to engage, to be present, to be involved in your child's life under this transit, because it can be very disconcerting experience for a child, and 14 years is a very long time in childhood to be experiencing that kind of energy. Because this is a house of our parents and Neptune is a planet of compassion, we might find that we need to make space for compassion for our parents under this transit, to sort of embrace them, love them no matter what, be unconditionally loving despite whatever they might be behaving like, whatever they might be going through. We're called to be compassionate to our parents, and also, if we are a parent, to be compassionate and embracing and unconditionally loving of our family in general, and that does include our children also as well. Now finally, Neptune is to idealize and to have a vision or a utopian concept. And in the fourth house, we get a very visionary, idealized, utopian concept about our family and domestic life and about our home space. So I'm not saying that you're going to get the dream home you've always wanted, but it is a good time to put your visualizations to work for you when Neptune is in the fourth house. Do a vision board around the kind of home you want and the kind of domestic life you want. If you see in a magazine a picture of a family where the dad is hugging the mum in the kitchen and the kids are lined up eating their breakfast without spilling it all over the place, put that on your vision board if that's the kind of scenario you want in your home. If you want to have a beautiful tree-lined driveway instead of, living in an apartment block or something like that, then put that on your vision board. Now, I'm not saying you're going to achieve those things, whatever you put regarding home and domestic life and family life on your vision board. But what I am saying is that by using your Neptune powers of imagination, you set the bar up here. And even if you don't reach the bar of like living in the Hamptons or something, even if you don't reach that idealized visionary status, you're going to sort of, the old adage to aim high, and you will, maybe you won't reach the stars, but you won't be on the earth just the same. I can't remember the actual phrasing of the old adage, but by aiming for something and having that vision, that high vision in front of you, you're going to rise higher than if you had no vision at all. And that's one of the powers of visualization, aspiration, dreaming. So get your dreams into action, get your dream board happening regarding home and domestic and family life, and you can find that in 14 years' time, infiltratingly in Neptune's smoky way, foggy way, it will bring in for you a rise up into something more closer aligned with your vision than you were when you started this transit, which all sounds great to me. So use that Neptune magic, people. Thanks for joining me for this sojourn through the 4th house with a Neptune transit. In 14 years' time, when this transit is over, do join me for Neptune's transit through the 5th house, where we can explore what that might be doing for you.